Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Messiah of Evil. Now, Messiah of Evil came out in 1973, and the film was written and directed by husband and wife team Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, both of whom would go on to become frequent collaborators with George Lucas. They would go on to co-write American Graffiti and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Apparently, Willard Huyck also did an uncredited rewrite for the script for the original Star Wars, which I wish I knew back when I reviewed the Star Wars movies. Like, I knew George Lucas had a lot of help with that script, but I wish I knew it was him. And Willard Huyck also directed Howard the Duck, which I know is considered to be one of the worst movies ever made. I've never seen that movie myself, so I really can't comment too much on that. Now, I have Messiah of Evil on this box set here called Chilling Classics, which is one of those 50 movie packs that feature 50 different public domain movies. Now, I have a couple of these public domain box sets, and I know I have this movie on at least one of the other box sets that I have. But I chose to show this box set because it was really through this one how I first saw the movie. So, the film is public domain, so you can watch this movie on YouTube if you want. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe there are a couple of factors that could lead a movie to falling into the public domain. Sometimes it happens when a film's rights expire and the rights holders don't renew them. Sometimes they can happen like when the film's being made and the filmmaker doesn't know how to properly copyright a film. But I'm not really sure what led this movie into falling into the public domain. You might have noticed a drastic change in lighting. I removed the shade from my lamp because I noticed that the video was a little dark. But Messiah of Evil, this, in my opinion, is an underrated classic. I do think this is one of the best horror films of the 1970s, and it's one of the creepiest movies I have ever seen. And in my opinion, this deserves to be ranked alongside stuff like The Exorcist and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Okay, maybe The Exorcist, maybe that's a little too high. I don't think it's as good as that movie. That's on a much different level than this, but at least stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Phantasm or Suspiria, like, I think this movie does deserve to be mentioned in the same league as those movies. And the movie does have a cult following, but it's still a very obscure movie, and in my opinion, the film deserves to be more well-known. At the same time, though, I'm kind of glad that the movie isn't as well known as those other movies that I mentioned, because if it was, I have a feeling that they would have tried to make, like, inferior sequels to it, and I'm kind of glad that this is a standalone movie. But yeah, the film is creepy as hell. It's so surreal and so dreamlike and so unsettling. Now, the movie almost feels like a weird amalgamation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth, Carnival of Souls, and Night of the Living Dead, with a little bit of Invasion of the Body Snatchers as well. Like, the movie has nothing to do with aliens, but it sort of has that feel like it's a small Californian town, and there's something happening in it that could spread to the rest of the world. But even saying that really doesn't do the movie justice. And it's almost kind of hard to categorize this movie. Like, in some ways you could call this a zombie movie. At the same time, it's also sort of a cult movie, and I don't mean cult movie as in it has a cult following. I mean, there's a literal cult in the movie, and in some ways it's also sort of a demonic possession movie. Now, the plot of Messiah of Evil is, it's about this young woman named Arletty who comes to this small town in California called Point Dune looking for her father, and she finds that her father is not at his house, and she goes asking about him around the town, and nobody can tell her shit, and it seems like her father just disappeared. Eventually, she meets this guy named Tom and his two female compatriots who are also looking for her father, because her father's a well-known artist, and it turns out that Tom is an admirer of his paintings, but also Tom collects legends, and there's an old legend in this town about something called the Blood Moon, and Tom believes that her father might know something about this legend. And it turns out there's something evil at work in the town, some kind of evil force that is possessing the town and is turning the townspeople into sort of like zombies or vampires or something, and this is spreading, and this could spread like a plague throughout the entire planet. But what's happening is connected to this legend of the Blood Moon, and is connected to something that happened in the town 100 years before. Now, in the film, Marianna Hill plays Arletty, and I think she does a really good job in this movie, and the character is very likable and very sympathetic, and I don't want to give away what happens towards the end of the movie, even though it's a 45-year-old film. Since the movie is so obscure, I want to be as spoiler-free as possible, but you definitely feel bad for her towards the end of the film. But some of the shit that does happen to her at the end of this movie is really creepy, and she really does sell it. Also in the movie, Michael Greer plays the character of Tom, and the character of Tom is... the best way I could describe him is he's kind of a pretentious douchebag, and he's also kind of a creep as well, especially in scenes like this.
Are you lost?
No. I've been walking. Have you seen the fires on the beach?
No, I haven't. Good night.
There is something you could do for me.
Yet somehow he's charismatic enough where you still like him. Like, you like him even when you shouldn't, and I love how in the movie he's constantly trying to sleep with Arletty.
Come on. It's all right.
There was a painting.
Come on, you've been having a bad dream. Come on, get in.
I don't know what else to do.
In the movie, Anitra Ford and Joy Bang play Tom's female compatriots, Laura and Tony, and I do feel like these characters are sort of the weak links in the movie. Like, the actresses do good jobs, but the characters are kind of weak and kind of stock. And I did think the character of Tony was kind of annoying. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to get into spoilers, but I am going to spoil this. Those characters do die in this movie, and the reason I'm spoiling that is I actually want to show their death scenes, because their death scenes, I feel like, are sort of the highlights of the movie. I mean, the whole movie is great, but these two scenes in particular, I think, are really fucking creepy. This is Laura's death scene. And this is Tony's death scene, which I think is the highlight of the film, and I also think is one of the creepiest scenes in horror movie history. Also, I love how in Tony's death scene, when you see this guy pop out, he doesn't immediately attack her. He's sort of given her a look that basically says, "You think you're gonna get away from us, don't you?" Elisha Cook Jr. plays an old drunk named Charlie in the beginning of the film, and the scene where he shows up is actually pretty cool, and what's interesting about this actor is he was in the 60s Batman series and the original Star Trek series, and so was Marianna Hill. I don't know if either of them showed up in the same episodes, but it's kind of interesting that both those actors were in both those series, and now they're in this movie.
Hard to remember back on things, but I remember the red moon my daddy told me about only once. Mama gave him a bad look when he talked about it. He was only a boy himself then. He called it the blood moon. He said that was the night that he lost religion. He learned that men could do horrible things. Like animals.
I'm really hungry. I've got the munchies.
Shut up. Go ahead, Charlie. What about the moon?
100 years ago, the moon started turning red up in the sky and things began to happen. It was like the red of the moon got up there, the closer the people were being jerked toward hell. Well, the people started bleeding out of control. They found children eating raw meat. It was like the town was festering with an open sore.
Elisha Cook Jr. interestingly played a similar character in Tobe Hooper's adaptation of Stephen King's Salem's Lot. Now, in the movie, there's this albino trucker who's part of this cult that worships the blood moon, and he's also one of the ones who sort of starts this zombie outbreak, if you will. And this character is creepy as shit.
Oh, hey, thanks.
You coming back from the waiting?
The what?
The waiting at the beach.
Uh-uh.
You like Wagner?
Oh, yeah, sure. Super. You can, let me off in town. You guys must have been, working late.
Moonlighting.
Moonlight.
Everybody was out there tonight, even the little creatures. I found a lot of them.
A lot of what?
Beach rats.
with them?
I eat them, that's what I do with them.
Now I want to introduce a short review on this movie that was done by my friend Christian Feliciano, who's been doing little short reviews in several of my other videos recently, and he had never heard of this movie, and I brought the movie to his attention, so it was really interesting hearing a short review from somebody who's never heard of the movie before, and seeing what his first impressions were.
Messiah of Evil. Now, a few days before I started this review, I had never heard of this film. Then Christian brought it to my attention, and without really doing any research, I went to see if there was a trailer. And to my surprise, I found the entire movie on YouTube. So instead, I clicked on that and, still cold, watched it, and I have to say, I really, really enjoyed this movie. First of all, let me get something out of the way. Marianna Hill? Oh my god! Oh my god! I wasn't even born in 1973, and I'm still like, where the hell was I? She is just a beauty, an angel with the face of a goddess. But anyway, now that I got that out the way, the film also stars Michael Greer and Thing 1 and Thing 2. That's what I call his two women, because in old B-movie fashion, that's pretty much how women were treated. Now, I'm not sensitive or anything about it, but I'm just letting you know that those two girls, played by Joy Bang, which is the most porn star sounding name, and Anitra Ford, are completely fucking useless in this movie. They're just eye candy for us to look at, and despite them being good eye candy, I have to admit, I didn't really care for them. However, there are some things that happen around them that are extremely interesting. Well, to be fair, there are a lot of extremely interesting things that happen to everyone in this film. I will try my hardest to be spoiler-free, but I feel like if I don't talk about some of this stuff, you won't get the gist of what I'm trying to say. So the first, and I have to say my favorite scene, is where we find one of the girls trying to go to sleep. Marianna Hill and Michael Greer are being too loud in the next room, and Thing 2 decides to go to sleep in another room, and as she does, she starts getting a creepy feeling and looks around the room. Now, what is eventually seen was so creepy that it bothered me a little bit. Note that I watched this movie at night and was sitting right next to a window when that scene happened. So I was a little bit, The next scene I will bring up is when we see an odd ritual or something taking place on a beach with the zombies, demon zombies, I guess. I know this is a zombie movie and that this era was still the golden age of the zombie genre, but they kind of act like demons as well, which I found cool actually. There is one scene where they really showcase this, and it takes place in a supermarket, and holy shit, it's a great scene. That's all I'll say about that, but, you know, it did a good job with what they had with these creatures. They were really cool. I really liked them. And overall, this is a fantastic movie. Yes, the acting and screenplay is shit, but that was typical for these kinds of movies back in the day. And yes, it does feel longer than it is, even though it is a very short movie, but it did a great job with what it had. It builds a nice atmosphere at some points that is very creepy and keeps you waiting for something to jump out, and when something does, and when something finally is revealed, whether it be a creepy, psychologically horrifying image or a jump scare, it really does work. Something else I haven't brought up also that really worked in this film was this weird fuck who you see throughout the film. I don't want to say that he's an albino, but he kind of looks like that. I'm not sure if he is, but I thought he was certainly an interesting bastard. Whether or not he is supposed to be in this film, or they just put a camera on a random guy they saw in the corner and decided to follow him around, I still don't know. But I'll say he did a really good job either way. I just hope that that weird bastard doesn't find me. Not because of how he looks or anything. I don't have a problem with that. It's just because of what he does in the film. But just so I don't ramble on too long, I'll end this review by saying please check this movie out. As I've implied, this is a very bizarre movie. I mean, very bizarre. This is almost like David Lynch level. It's just really weird. And even though I'm trying here, I don't feel like I've done it justice. because it really does need to be seen to know what the fuck I'm talking about.
I hope you enjoyed my friend's review of the movie. Now, I'll respectfully disagree with him on points that the acting and script are pure shit. Now, none of the acting in this film is necessarily Oscar caliber by any means, but I do think it's decent. For the kind of movie that this is, it is decent acting. And as for the screenplay, even as a fan of this movie, I'll admit, it's not the most well-written film in the world. At the same time, though, in a weird way, that's kind of a strength of the movie, because one of the weaknesses of the script is you're not 100% sure really what the hell's going on in this town. Like, on some level, they seem like a cult, but they're also zombies, but some of them seem to be doing this willingly, while others are doing it because it's demonic possession or a virus, so you're not really sure exactly what's going on in the town, and you could call that a weakness of the script, but at the same time, though, that kind of adds to it too, because there's such a level of ambiguity to the film. And in some ways, the film almost follows dream logic, which really adds to this nightmarish feel that the film has, because the movie really does feel like a nightmare. But Christian, I am glad that you liked the movie, and I 100% agree with you about Marianna Hill. But yeah, Messiah of Evil, I think, is a classic film, and I think the movie deserves a bigger cult following than it has. And the movie is creepy and nightmarish and surreal and atmospheric as hell, and this is right up your alley if you like David Lynch, even though this movie came out a few years prior to Lynch's first movie, Eraserhead. But even though this movie predates David Lynch, it does have sort of a Lynchian feel. Like, you could argue that maybe this is a movie that David Lynch took inspiration from. Now, if I were to recommend a movie that's similar to this, that actually came out, I think the same year, it might have came out before, I'm not sure, but there's a movie called Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which also has sort of the same surreal, nightmarish feel to it. Now, I'm not saying I want to see a remake of this, but if they ever did do a remake of this, one director who I think would do a good job with this is the guy who directed It Follows. I could see that guy doing a pretty good remake of this movie. But yeah, that's my review on Messiah of Evil, and bye.
Yuck. This stuff is shitty tasting.
You're not supposed to eat the fuzz.